All right, everybody, welcome back. It's me again, not coronavirus, but your teacher, Mr. Edwards. Hey, we're going to talk about chapter 29 today. Get ready for, and all the way through World War I, and see what comes about. First thing we need to do is get Wilson into office. Now, first of all, Wilson started off as a New Jersey lawyer. He was liked by the big city bosses, and they wanted to use him as a puppet. They thought they were smarter than him. Little did they know, they're going to be wrong. He endorses them. They're good with him. Lo and behold, he becomes governor of the state of New Jersey. Joke's on them, though. He decided, I'm going to bring down the big city bosses, and works against them in a big way. Makes them mad, makes Democrats happy, and they think he is the perfect choice to move on to president and challenge the ever-powerful Taft and possibly
Teddy Roosevelt,
who, if you remember correctly, promised he would never, ever run again. I think he's going to lie. Because by 1912, things are not happy. He's mad at Taft. Taft's bringing down businesses he doesn't like. And ultimately, Wilson is going to have to run against both Taft and Roosevelt when Roosevelt joins the Bull Moose Party. Because of the split in the Republican Party, the Bull Moose and Taft, Wilson's going to get the election pretty easily. He's going to be a minority president. Minority meaning he didn't have most of the popular vote. He gets elected, and he's really full of himself. Super smart guy, and liked to call himself Dr. Wilson more than President Wilson. He thought he was so smart, if he didn't like what you were saying, he'd walk away from a conversation thinking that you were not nearly as smart as him. Now that hard-headedness is going to come back to hurt him. This little thing called the Treaty of Versailles. We'll get to that in a little bit. It's going to suck for the United States and the rest of the world, leading directly to World War II, not one. Wilson, as president, was also a progressive. Remember, the progressives are a movement, not a political party. You had Democratic progressives, you had Republican progressives. Wilson was definitely the first Democratic progressive president in our history. He wanted to get some things done. Remember, under the progressives, you're going to get 4, maybe 5 amendments to the Constitution. We're going to get the 16th, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th. You might want to throw the 20th in there too, but we'll get to those as we go along. He wanted to bring down the triple wall of privilege: banks, trusts, and tariffs. Tariffs were high, no income tax. 16th Amendment, here it comes. One of the first things Wilson did was bring about the Federal Reserve Commission. Federal Reserve Act. It's going to create 12 different districts in the United States with the possibility of printing money. Now, if you look at your dollar bills right now, they no longer say gold certificate or silver certificate. They say Federal Reserve note. Those bills are printed in one of the 12 districts, A through L if you look on your bill. Another thing that Wilson wanted to do is continue to bring down trusts. The problem is that the trusts were so powerful, had such good lawyers, they could use things like the Sherman Antitrust Act against business. They could use it against smaller businesses. They could use it against the labor union. So we're going to get the Clayton Antitrust Act passed. That Clayton Antitrust Act is going to reinforce and get rid of all the loopholes under the Sherman Antitrust Act and allow the government to function better and to bring down trusts that were not effective and hurting other businesses. Some other things that passed under Wilson was the Federal Farm Loan Act, allowing farmers to get loans based on other types of collateral. We're going to have the Adamson Act. We're going to have the Lawful Seamen's Act, which allowed for good treatment of sailors on American ships outside of American waters, because once you got outside of American waters, bad things could happen on a ship. So to protect Americans and American interests, we're going to pass the Lawful Seamen's Act. Wilson's also going to put into the Supreme Court Louis Brandeis. Louis Brandeis wrote a book, Other People's Money and How Bankers Use It. He's also the first Jewish American to be put on the Supreme Court bench, which is a big move for Wilson considering who he supported during the Civil War and how he felt about certain individuals. Wilson's going to try to get rid of the bad neighbor policy, started with the big stick theory by TR and dollar diplomacy. The bad thing is America's not ready for it, neither is Latin America. As a result, America's going to invade Haiti, we're going to get the Virgin Islands, and we're going to continue to be aggressive in Latin America. Also, we'll get the Virgin Islands during this time period from Denmark, and as a nice gift to the Filipinos, we passed the Jones Act that said, hey, Philippines, when you guys have a government that we like, that you can sustain, we might get out of your place. That'll happen after World War II, 4th of July, 1946. During this time period, America had to deal with Mexico also. It wasn't left out of the Latin American countries, and they are definitely going through some problems. Remember, Mexico's going to get their independence from Spain way back in the 1820s, and they're going to go through a series of constitutions, a series of leaders, a series of generals that are taking control, new constitutions written, and none of it seems to work out very well. By the early 19 teens, America is struggling with the leaders of Mexico, And there's a huge major coup. And in that coup, General Huerta is going to come into power. General Huerta is not liked by the Americans, so the Americans do the most American thing possible. Supply both sides of the bad guys, hope one of them takes out the current leadership. So America's going to send some money towards Vistuiana Carranza and this guy named Pancho Villa. Maybe you heard of him before. They're going to get guns, they're going to get money, and they're going to try to take out General Huerta. Eventually, Carranza's going to take out Huerta. Pancho Villa is a little upset at America, so Pancho Villa decides to invade America. He's going to kill some Americans in northern Mexico, kill some Americans in New Mexico, and then get back into Mexico. If you want to know, Pancho Villa is the only successful invader of the United States. We never caught him. We sent General Blackjack Pershing to go capture him. Now, Blackjack gets his name not because he's really good at gambling, but because he was the leader of the Buffalo Soldiers. Blackjack Pershing's going to chase Pancho Villa around northern Mexico, never catch him, and then this little thing called Thunder Across the Seas starts, where Blackjack Pershing's going to ship out to Europe and be the commander of the American forces during World War I. As a result, we never capture Pancho Villa. Yay, Pancho. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time. Look at the map. Look at the time. It is World War I time. Now, this could be one of the most confusing starts to a war that has ever happened. Now, imagine, you're in Europe, you're in Southern Europe, you're in Southern Eastern Europe, and you may be Serbian. But, to your dismay, there's this little country called Austria-Hungary who thinks they own you. Archduke Ferdinand decides he's going to take a trip, check out all the land that he thought was his. Bad idea. He's going to go down into Serbia, take a little ride. This dude decides he wants to take out the Archduke Ferdinand. He's a member of a group called the Order of the Black Hand. This dude named Princeps is going to take out the Archduke Ferdinand. Now that doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but for some reason the Austria-Hungarians are a little upset. They want to go down, they want to kill the Serbians. But they knew if they kill the Serbians got this little ally called Russia. You didn't know it's slightly a larger country than Austria-Hungary. So before Austria-Hungary could go down into Serbia and kill the Serbians, Austria-Hungary is going to ask Germany for help. They're like, hey, Germany, we speak kind of the same language. We want to kill Serbia, but if we do, Russia's going to kill us. You've got our backs. Germany says, yep, we got your back. So Germany backs up Austria. They don't go attack Russia. Instead, they take on France. Why not? It's France. They can't be that hard to beat. Why do they take on France? Because France has an allyship with Russia, which makes no sense. But the British also have an ally relationship with France. And now, because of these relationships that are created, because of all these backdoor little treaties, because of all these familial relationships, you've got World War I. With the pink guys being the bad guys, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the huge colossal power of Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, known as Turkey, versus the Italians, the French, the British, and the Russians. That is the start of World War I. By the way, the leaders of all of these countries are all related. They're cousins. They'd practiced this forever, just waiting for a match to start. What's America doing? Watching and waving. Probably selling arms to both sides, whoever's buying the American way. Okay, the real question is who's America gonna help? You know how I said they might have been selling to both sides? Well, we got allies on each side. What language do we speak? English. What's one of the largest immigrants group to America? German. Who are we gonna help? Well, the American public quickly is going to say, hey, we need to be against the Germans. To hell with the Kaiser. Hang the Kaiser, the beast of Berlin. He's a bad man. And that's how it's sold in America. And immediately, America thinks there's a ton of German spies in America. German Americans are treated poorly. Some of them are tarred and feathered. And then we go to extreme measures, like we outlaw German in schools. We outlaw German music. Some of that stuff's pretty good. We call it classicals. And we keep moving in an anti-German sentiment, creating a real problem between the United States and the Germans, and especially German-American immigrants. America, early on, starts to warn Germans not to be very mean to us. They've got these things called U-boats. If you didn't know what that is, that's called a submarine. Can't see them coming, don't have radar, they just sneak up and destroy you, and it pretty much sucks. We tell the Germans, hey, if you sink any of our ships, there'll be serious repercussions if you do. So you better watch out. And America thought they were spies all over the United States. Sometimes those fears came true. In New York City, supposedly a German spy is sitting on a train, and in his briefcase he's got plans for industrial sabotage. We call that terrorism. Somehow he decides to get off the train and leaves his briefcase with all of his spy stuff in it. The Americans find it, automatically think that the Germans are trying to kill us all. It may have been planted though. What kind of a good spy leaves a briefcase with spy plans in it on the train? Come on, man. I don't think it was the Germans. History will find out. In 1915, Germany sinks a passenger liner named the Arabic. Now, who goes out after passenger liners? It's just a bunch of people on a cruise. It's a good day. Boom, you're dead. We told the Germans, that's bad, you better stop. About a few months later, they sink another passenger liner called the Essex. And now we're like, hey, you better watch out. Don't sink any of our ships. Wilson was so frustrated, he told the Germans, hey, if you continue to sink passenger liners, we will officially drop diplomatic relations. Not that. Diplomatic relations? We won't talk to the Germans? Whatever. The Germans said, fine, we won't sink any ships without warning them first. How does that happen? Warning them? When do you send out the warning? After you've launched the torpedo? Do you say, hey, you jump, boom? Do you do it beforehand? Jump, boom, who knows? But we'll warn them first, and that still freaks out the United States. Wilson, in 1916, runs for re-election. Not a lot of competition, dude named Charles Evans Hughes, closer than people thought it was gonna be. Wilson gets re-elected. One of the main things Wilson says is he wants to keep America out of the war. When he's re-elected and gives his speech, his inaugural speech, he says, hey, we can achieve peace without victory. How do you do that? Hopefully by just supplying one side with enough money to beat the other side and not killing Americans. That might not last very long. Wilson doesn't know what to do as more and more ships are getting sunk. In 1917, just after Wilson gives his speech, a couple of days later, Germany announced unrestricted submarine warfare. No more warning, gonna sink ships. Now Wilson is mad. He tells Germany, that's it. Diplomatic relations, off. Which for the Germans didn't matter anyway. We were selling them about that much stuff. They weren't giving American aid. We were helping out the British, and they knew it. Then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes a secret note called the Zimmerman Note. Now let's think about this note. This note said, hey Mexico, if you join our side and kick America's butt, after the war's over, we'll give you back everything you lost back during the Mexican-American War. And Mexico thinks maybe that's a good idea. The problem is how does this message get all the way over to Mexico? Well, we've got the Telegraph. The Telegraph will go, I don't know, through England, through Iceland, through Greenland, through Canada, through America, and then possibly to Mexico. Do you think at any point in time somebody might say, hey America, Mexico wants to kill you? Probably. Did the Zimmerman Note exist? Maybe. Did the Germans want the Mexicans to beat up the Americans? Probably. Could they? I'm gonna go no. It wouldn't have worked. But the Zimmerman Note does freak out the Americans. We move closer and closer to war. And at this point in time, something dramatic happens. There's a group in Russia that's going to start this thing called the Bolshevik Revolution. All of you guys say Bolshevik. It feels good and you're not swearing. So basically the Bolshevik Revolution is this guy named Lenin, this other guy named Trotsky, go back to Russia and they're like, hey, I've got an idea. How about we just stop fighting, go back to our homes, and we'll start this little thing called communism. Boy, the Russians like that. Why? They have the biggest casualties during the war. There's a lot of dead Russians, and the Tsar, Nicholas II, didn't seem to be helping out that much. So the Russians literally drop their guns and go home. This is when America freaks out, because without Russia, the Eastern Front is open, and now we're going to be in a lot of trouble. The Russians dropping out of the war, the Zimmerman Note, the sinking of the Lusitania, which we thought was not very nice. The Germans were sinking passenger liners again. The Germans say, hey, America, you have weapons on that ship. We're like, no, we don't. Yes, we did. But most Americans didn't know, and it made us upset. You add all those things together, Wilson's going to have to drop the bomb and start the war. When Wilson declares war, America's now in it. The problem is America's not really ready for war. We're good at selling things. We're good at building things. We ain't good at going over to foreign countries and fighting. In fact, America has never, ever gone to Europe to fight in a war, with the exception of maybe the war with Tripoli and Jefferson. Not good. But we're not ready for that. It's a European problem. It's not an American problem. America's not getting attacked. For the first time in American history, we're going to have to go to war, and we have to go to war based on a set of ideals, not on a set of gains. We're not going to gain land. We're not going to gain money. We're not going to gain prestige. Maybe. But it's based on ideals. We have to believe in this idea that the Kaiser is a bad guy. And Wilson has to sell this to America. And he's going to employ a guy named George Creel. George Creel is going to be in charge of the Committee of Public Information. And Creel's job is to go out and sell the war to America, because Congress is even split on a little bit. However, Congress jumps in, they declare war, and we go selling the war to America. And it became super difficult. The problem is George Creel might have been too good. In fact, he was so good, he made America look unbeatable and made Wilson look like he was the savior of the world. So Wilson's going to come up with what he calls his 14-point plan. It starts off as many more points than 14, but eventually it gets trimmed down and trimmed down and trimmed down. Some of the important part of the 14-point plan include no more secret treaties, freedom of the seas, the establishment of territorial lands for countries that wanted their own claim. Philippines, think about that. Also, the creation of what's called the League of Nations. The League of Nations would be a multi-nation organization trying to keep wars from happening. And this is what Wilson's got to go and sell. Now, you need to know that Americans did not participate very much in the war. It took us a year to get there. Once we got there, we didn't get involved in battles early on. We just sat in France, ate some croissants, had a little bit of coffee, and waited for the call. Well, eventually, after about a year, we get called. We use a lot of European weapons. We get to the front lines. We work very hard in dominating this war. America's going to push the Germans back as we get to the front lines. We get involved in the battles of Meuse-Argonne, the Battle of St. Mihiel, and eventually America's going to put a stop to the Germans' advance with the help of the other Allied powers. To protect Americans during the war, the fear of spies, America's going to pass 2 laws. One of them might sound a little familiar. It's called the Sedition Act. John Adams. The other one's called the Espionage Act. The purpose of these acts were to round up people that we felt were a threat to the American government. You know, socialists like Eugene V. Debs and Big Bill Haywood. They'll be thrown in jail during the war, but they're released after the war, so it's really not that bad. Unless you're a socialist named Eugene V. Debs or Big Bill Haywood, or some of the other socialists that are around. For the war, America's going to adopt a worker fight rule. If you're old enough to go to war, you're probably going to go unless you worked in an industry that was directly related to supporting the war. The other thing that's going to happen is Americans, a lot of men are going to have to go off to war. They're called doughboys, okay? Women are going to have to start to take up those jobs. Another interesting thing that happens is that as more and more men ship off to war, for the first time in American history, we're going to have what's called the Great Migration. And that's going to be the migration of African Americans out of the South into the North, into the industrial cities, taking up jobs that white people were doing, white men were doing before they went off to war. So we're going to have the expansion of probably the KKK eventually as blacks move out of the South into the North. The KKK is probably going to follow. Also, we took on a lot of self-interest things. We tried to get ready for the war. We had the War Industries Board. We had the Administration of Food Act, or Food Administration. That was led by Herbert Hoover. And under the Food Administration, we encouraged Americans to really conserve food. Things like meatless Mondays, wheatless Wednesdays, and those little gardens that you guys have in your backyard. I know some of you got them that produce 10,000 zucchini that you just drop off at your neighbor's house because you got too many zucchini. You don't know what to do with it. Those are left over from victory gardens that were promoted by the Food Administration during the war. We had the fuel administration trying to conserve fuel. All these things are going on as America ramped up for this war and as America worked together to make sure the Americans could help win this war. And eventually, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, there's going to be an armistice in 1919 that'll help draw an end to World War I. Now, the Germans agree to the armistice based on Wilson's 14 points, thinking that Wilson would be able to save everybody and set the world right. One other side note that happens during this war is the 18th Amendment, Prohibition. As we've studied past times, Prohibition and temperance became very big. However, during World War I, remember that most alcohol is made with certain types of food. Vodka is made out of potatoes. If you weren't aware, wine is made out of grapes. Beer comes from hops and barley, and all these things are things we can eat, we can ingest. Plus, with Prohibition starting, remember that the two biggest makers of alcohol in America are Anheuser-Busch and Adolphus Coors, German-American immigrants. So when it came to taking them out, passing the Prohibition, it was an easy sell for the Americans. It was for the American cause, for the war cause. It was Germans making all the alcohol. We hate the Germans, and that's how Prohibition gets started and accepted across the board in America. So Wilson decides he's going to go over to Versailles to work on this treaty between the United States, the other Allied powers, and the German and Austrian allies. As he gets over there, like I said before, he was oversold by George Creel. Europeans thought he was going to be able to save everybody. Most popular man in Europe. However, not the most popular man in America. 1918 midterm election, the Republicans are going to take over the Senate. And when he goes over to Germany, or over to Versailles, he does not take the Senate Foreign Relations Committee leader, Henry Cabot Lodge. He takes no Republicans with him, blackballs them, makes them feel like they're not wanted. So whatever Wilson does in Europe, when he gets back home with it, he's going to have a problem. Now, the average European didn't understand this. However, the European leaders did. And they started to make all sorts of concessions, wanting this, wanting that, and it was falling apart. Wilson, being very hard-headed, as we talked about before, thinking he's always right, had a hard time making any concessions. But eventually, Wilson's going to have to. And they're going to whittle the 14-point plan down to like the 4-point plan. And of those 4 points, the most important for Wilson was the League of Nations. This multinational organization that was going to be for the extension of freedom, for the stopping of any wars that might happen. The problem is he's got to bring that treaty back home and sell it to America. So Wilson comes back home, gives the treaty to the Senate because they've got to approve it, and immediately it's going to run into the Republicans. Henry Cabot Lodge makes his own 14 points to mock Wilson, and he decides to read the entire 264-page treaty out loud in the Senate just to, number one, make people upset, number two, make people not listen, and number three, frustrate the Americans. Wilson and Lodge are at arms. They do not like each other, and both sides think they're right. Wilson decides to do what any good American president does, go to the public. So Wilson's going to get on a train, he's going to tour America, and tell the Americans to support the treaty and the League of Nations because it's so important. The problem is his doctors say, hey, Woodrow, don't do it. You're sick, you're feeble, you're old, you'll die. Wilson, knowing more than anybody else, decides, I can do this. He gets on the train. Right behind him are two Republicans, Senator Borah and Senator Johnson. Every stop that Wilson makes, they show up 10 minutes later and say, don't believe anything that guy just said. Wilson's so upset, he actually has a stroke and nearly dies. He goes back to Washington, D.C. He's not even spoken to for several months, and the Treaty of Versailles looks like it's not going to pass. When it comes to vote in the Senate, Wilson asks his Democrat friends not to vote for it, the treaty that he signed. Don't vote for it because of Lodge. They didn't. The American people are upset. They go to vote on it again. Wilson asks the Democrats not to vote on it, and lo and behold, America's never going to sign the Treaty of Versailles. When America doesn't sign the treaty, it keeps America, the strongest of all these nations, out of the league, which allows for Hitler to gain power. Europe can't stop him. America's out because we don't want to deal with it. It's another European problem. Hitler's going to gain power. No one's going to stop him and lead directly to World War II. What happens to Wilson in the end? Well, he finished up with his stroke. He meets with people privately, doesn't make a lot of public appearances. 1920 rolls along, and we have a presidential election. In that presidential election, the Democrats are hit hard by the war. The Republicans go with Warren G. Harding, and the Democrats go with Mr. Cox. Now, Warren G. Harding's campaign slogan was a return to normalcy. Now, for all you fans of laissez-faire politics, it's the Americans going back to the late 1900s, laissez-faire, Gilded Age politics, the rise of businesses, and all the stuff the progressives had worked so hard for is going to go right out the window. What's the results? Ultimately, America is going to become isolationistic, meaning we care about ourselves, rebuilding ourselves after the war. We're going to leave Europe alone, although they're going to owe us a lot of money, and trying to get that back is going to be very, very difficult. Woodrow Wilson is only going to live for a couple more years. He's going to die in 1924. He's going to be seen mostly as a failure as a president because of the Treaty of Versailles. But those progressive things he did early in his career actually helped out America a lot with the amendments, with the acts that were passed, and America was stronger because of Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That's the end of chapter 29. Test is coming up pretty soon. Watch out for it.